good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. With the Bank of Korea expected to hold its first monetary policy meeting of the year, eyes are on what move it will make on its key interest rate and growth forecast. The Land Ministry announces plans to spend more on housing support and to improve public transportation. These stories and more coming right up. The rise in Korea's grocery prices has ranked in the top 3 among the 34 member countries of the OECD for a third straight month. According to OECD data, Korea's grocery prices jumped 4.5% in November from the year before, which is the third highest after Mexico and Japan. Korea came in second in October with a rate of 5% and was in first place in September at 5.6%. The price increases were mainly attributed to the higher costs for fresh produce after a scorching heat wave and drought last year. Korean investors are increasingly looking abroad to grow their money. According to data from Korea Financial Investment Association, their net overseas assets and investment funds had reached a new record high of 91.7 trillion won, or roughly $77.5 billion as of last Friday. The amount is also on track to cross the 100 trillion won level soon. And market watchers explain that the return to overseas funds is being driven by lackluster returns at home on the back of low rates and weak growth. Real estate-based funds accounted for the largest chunk of the overseas assets, followed by equity funds, fund of funds, and bonds and derivatives. The Bank of Korea is expected to keep its key rates steady but cut its growth outlook when officials gather tomorrow for their first monetary policy meeting of the year. Our Shin Se-min has this report.
The Bank of Korea is gearing up for its first monetary policy meeting of the year on Friday after having cut the number of meetings from 12 to 8 last year. The bank is widely expected to keep its benchmark rate unchanged at the current record low of 1.25%, given the slow growth of the Korean economy, despite a moderate pickup in exports. The BOK last cut the rate by 0.25% back in June in a bid to prop up the local economy. The central bank is reportedly agonizing over its rate adjustment decision after the U.S. Federal Reserve signaled it could raise rates at a faster pace than previously anticipated. After the Fed raised its key rate by 25 basis points in December, there were concerns in Korea about a potential foreign capital flight.
The BOK is in a difficult position as the pressure to boost Korea's base rate will continue to linger. And even as the Fed's move had been foreseen, the Korean economy is still looking bad.
That's because a rate hike would act as a drag on Korea's staggering household debt, hovering over $1.1 trillion, while a rate cut would only prompt more Koreans to take out loans. On top of that, consumer sentiment dropped to a near 8-year low late last year, with the current political scandal discouraging economic activity. Also at the policy meeting scheduled for Friday, the Bank of Korea will unveil its growth target for the year, which is likely to be revised downward from its previous projection of 2.8% in October. A number of research organizations had revised Korea's growth outlook down into the mid-2% range, including the government, which cut its forecast to 2.6% from an initial 3%. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
And to tell us more about the BOK's first rate-setting meeting, Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joins us in the studio today. Great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So markets are expecting the central bank to stay pat on the benchmark interest rate, right?
That's correct. Bank of Korea fixed its key interest rate at 1.25% on annual basis from June of last year. This is because Bank of Korea believes that interest rate policy does not have any power without massive expansionary policy, fiscal policy. And also regarding the possibility of the interest rate changes by central bank, there was a very interesting survey over 100 bond market participants the day before yesterday. everybody, without exception, answered that there won't be changes of interest rate this time.
Now, eyes are also on the bank's growth outlook. So tell us what we can expect on this front.
Well, almost every single economic research institutions are decreasing economic growth forecast of this year. For example, the KDI, the think tank of the Korean government, decreased down to 2.4%. And government decreased Korean economic growth rate for this year down to 2.6%. So it is highly expected that Bank of Korea will also decrease this year's economic growth rate down to 2.5% level. For reference, private think tanks' growth rate forecasts are around 2.1%.
Okay, well, there have been also criticisms that the bank's growth outlook is often wrong and too optimistic. So we hear that the Bank of Korea is actually planning to do something different this year in response to that.
Right. Everyone, like congressmen, governments, media, attacks the inaccuracy of Bank of Korea's economic forecast. I'm not in position to defend Bank of Korea, but this kind of forecast is based on a statistical model, which necessarily includes a certain amount of errors. This is why many economists hate to be involved in forecast. And this time, facing the criticism on their forecast, the Bank of Korea is willing to communicate more with people outside of the banks, and they will more often update their forecast.
Okay, well, now I think one of the biggest concerns for the Korean economy right now are the rising grocery prices.
Right.
And the bank is aiming for 2% inflation this year. So what kind of measures do you think the bank will put forth in order to reach that target?
Well, actually, the overall price level, even though we saw that from the report, the grocery inflation is pretty high, the overall price level, the average of over 600 goods and services price is very stable still until December of last year. So Bank of Korea believes that inflation pressure is not really realized yet.
Okay.
However, we know that there is a pressure of the inflation from higher oil price and eggs price. But unfortunately, this is supply side generated inflation, and Bank of Korea does not have any tools on this supply side inflation. So they will see wait more until inflation is realized.
Now, do you think we could be seeing monetary policy giving way to fiscal policy this year?
Well, at the beginning of this year, actually, every member of Monetary Policy Committee emphasized the role of expansionary fiscal policy. So I believe that at the beginning of this year, fiscal policy will take the initiative of the government policies. But in the second half of this year, when U.S. Federal Reserve increases its interest rate more, Bank of Korea's monetary policy will take initiatives.
Now, the Korean economy, no doubt, is faced with a lot of uncertainties, including slowing exports and low demand, growing household debt, and political instability due to the ongoing Chosun scandal. So with that in mind, what should be on top of the BOK's agenda for this year?
Well, to maximize economic policy for recovering economy, the harmony or coordination between fiscal and monetary policy is extremely important. So I believe the role of monetary policy for this year is something supporting tool or helping hands to fiscal policy. So therefore, Bank of Korea has a high possibility to go through expansionary monetary policy by decreasing interest rate.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you very much.
Volkswagen has agreed to plead guilty in the United States over its emissions cheating scandal and to pay over $4 billion in penalties. This comes as prosecutors charged 6 current and former senior Volkswagen executives on Wednesday for engaging in the 10-year conspiracy. The automaker will pay a $2.8 billion criminal fine and $1.5 billion in civil fines. It has also agreed to pay the state of California $153.8 million and to spend up to $22 billion in the United States to address claims from environmental regulators, car owners, state governments, and dealers. Volkswagen still faces lawsuits from about 20 states and U.S. investors and will spend years either buying back or fixing nearly 580,000 affected vehicles. The Chinese government has decided to extend a period of anti-dumping duties on Korea-made optical fibers for an additional 5 years starting this January. China's Ministry of Commerce stated on its website that this is to further prevent dumping activities and protect its domestic industry. But some in Korea say this is Beijing's latest move in a series of measures to retaliate against Seoul for its THAAD deployment decision. Korean manufacturers will continue to pay 46% in anti-dumping tariffs for their shipments, with the exception of LS Cable and Daehan Fiber Optics, which are subject to duties under 10%. The two firms received lower tariff levels for taking part in China's anti-dumping investigation in 2005. Roughly 60% of the year's budget on public infrastructure and safety is set to be front-loaded in the first half of this year. Now, a major part of that will be used to reduce housing expenses while making public transportation even more convenient. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport has rolled out its new blueprint for this year to bring about major changes in two areas closely tied to people's everyday lives. First off, in the housing sector.
We will reduce the burden of housing for the middle class and strengthen housing welfare.
The Land Ministry aims to give a total of 1.1 million households support for housing in various forms. Specifically, it will make 120,000 public rental homes available while increasing the number of households eligible for subsidies. 180,000 households will also be able to receive partial funding for either buying or renting out lump sum deposit jeonse homes. Also, public transportation is looking to get more high-tech. The Land Ministry said a self-driving bus will be up and running in the Pangyo area just outside of Seoul by December, making Korea one of the first countries to put an autonomous car on the road for regular use. Non-stop KTX bullet trains running between Seoul and Busan will also start operations by no later than July, substantially cutting down travel time to about an hour and 50 minutes from what was nearly 3 hours. What's more, Koreans living in the greater metropolitan area are expected to have a much more pleasant time going to work during rush hour starting March, with the introduction of commute-only M-buses that allow users to reserve seats with their smartphones. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
It's been found that pork tops the list of imported food products mislabeled as produced in Korea, likely in pursuit of higher profits. A survey conducted last year by the National Agricultural Products Quality Management Service found that some 4,300 companies out of 262,000 had mislabeled agri-food products. Most such imports came from Chinese firms on produce. Livestock products made up the bulk of mislabeled goods from U.S., Australian, and Chilean companies. More than half of these imports were sent to restaurants, followed by butchers, processors, and supermarkets. Korea's top online portal Naver is estimated to have generated nearly $2.5 billion in advertising revenue last year. According to industry sources, the company's sales grew from the ad sector grew nearly 30% from the previous year on the back of growing demand in mobile platforms and increased shopping ads. The 2016 figure is almost twice the combined ad revenue of about 3,700 newspapers across Korea. Naver is estimated to have raked in nearly $685 million from ad sales in the fourth quarter alone, a first for the company. Market watchers say the portal giant's ad revenue is projected to hit $3 billion this year. And that does it for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.